Welcome to episode number 337, where I'm speaking with Kate O'Donnell about her highly anticipated new book, Everyday Ayurveda for Women's Health. In this episode, we focus on hormonal health, the Ayurvedic perspective on hormones, and we talk about how stress can affect our hormonal health. So please stay tuned. Hi there, I'm your host Colette, and on this podcast I will be sharing the teachings of Ayurveda, yoga, and holistic health practices. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend checking out the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. Thanks for listening, and now here's a new episode. Welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. And today I'm very happy to welcome Kate O'Donnell, who has spent the last 25 years traveling through the far reaches of India in search of ancient healing practices to bring back to the US. Through her own healing journey, Kate experienced firsthand how a holistic system creates lasting health. She's since emerged as a preeminent expert in Ayurveda and has built her own method customized for modern Americans. Her individualized approach, guiding from disease to ease, has transformed the lives of thousands of people and made her one of the most respected thought leaders in holistic medicine. Kate is a 3-time best-selling author, a highly sought-after speaker, and the founder of the Ayurvedic Living Institute, where she has educated a generation of practitioners. And today we're going to talk to Kate about her new book. Kate, welcome back to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, Colette.
Likewise. And we're going to talk today about your new book, Everyday Ayurveda for Women's Health. And what I would love to start with is, why did you want to write this book, and how would you like people to use this book?
Yes, I wrote this book because I felt that Ayurveda has some real gold for women at this particular time. Women in all stages, I feel like the way that we can understand things like periods and in how to heal periods, I think Ayurveda has some gold there. I think perimenopause and menopause transitions, absolutely, as well as fertility and definitely postpartum, so there's some unique perspectives in how Ayurveda looks at the body, which I think we'll talk about today, that I feel they're simple and they're intuitive. And even the language that we use to describe the body is experiential. So it's this empowering way that we can understand our bodies and have, I think, definitely a deeper sense of agency in how we care for ourselves and how we manage things like menstrual cycles, menopause, gestation and birth, and all these things that are unique to the woman's physiology.
And then in how people use the book, you delve deep into all these stages of a woman's life, right? And then you provide some great recipes and so on. So how do you envision people using the book?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for people to read the beginning part of the book first, right?
Right.
Chapter 1 is that Ayurvedic perspective on hormones. I think it's important that we kind of get the language out there. And to that end, Colette, I recorded the first 3 chapters of the book as audio tracks that people can get for free when they buy the book.
Ah, great.
So I'll make sure that's my way of making sure that people have a few options for how to digest the information, in those first 3 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll make sure that's in the show notes. And I'm known for food, I'm known for recipes, and how food affects the body, heals the body. So of course, the whole 4th section of the book is all recipes. And I developed those using the foods that Ayurveda texts call out for being great for chikitsa, or therapeutics of women's bodies, of women's health. And so that was fun for me, to come up with sort of a new body of food work there. But I think what most people are going to do with this book is probably go to part 3 first, where I cover, there's a chapter for sort of each phase of life. So it's like, oh, I'm in perimenopause, let me go read that.
Right.
Or, I'm trying to have a baby, let me go read that. So I feel like people are probably going to start there. And my hope is that then, and there's a lot of cross-referencing in the book. So it'll be like you're reading about perimenopause, and I'll be like, and, here's a box with recipes that are great for hot flashes, or, dinacharya, like daily routine practices that are great for hot flashes. And then it'll point you over to that part of the book.
Yes, I saw that. You put the page number in there and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that in the book, because it's kind of a little bit of a beast, right? It's a big book. And I don't want people to feel overwhelmed at all. So I definitely encourage people to just jump in where you feel called. And then what you'll find is the book, it's like a, choose your own adventure kind of thing. And the book will point you here and then point you there.
Yeah.
Over time, you'll begin to take in what I have put forward, which is really the idea that it's kind of like there's 3 themes that run through the book. There's what we put in our bodies, like food and herbs. And there's how we move our bodies, if we move our bodies, and how circulation is so important for these women's health problems that we see. And then there's what I think is dear to my heart is how we live our lives. And that's the kind of thing that I think this book will teach a lot, open up a lot of avenues for people to reflect on and integrate new philosophies of how they do life, and how I do me and how you do you,
Right.
And that kind of thing takes time. I wouldn't expect people to feel that transformation for 6 months, 12 months of working with the book. So it's the kind of thing, I think, keep it around, and poke around in it over time, and keep it somewhere you can see it in your house.
Yeah, there's so much great information in there, and really takes a woman through the span of her life, right? From hormones, as you said, right through to perimenopause and menopause. And what I'd love to focus on is hormonal health. And what I'd love to start with here is the Ayurvedic perspective on hormones.
Absolutely. Yeah. The first thing I want to say is that I've been traveling a lot, and kind of like beginning to share this body of work with groups. And one of the ways I've been starting the talk is I'll say, has anyone heard the term, hormone balance? And everybody raises their hand. I'm like, does anyone know what the F that means?
Right.
And everyone just kind of throws up their hands, right? So it's like we're being sold this very vague information right now that a lot of people are taking symptoms at different stages of life and just pinning them with this like, oh, it's my hormones. And I don't think that's helpful. And that's, again, part of why I have this fire, to really share this body of work. So the first thing about Ayurveda and hormones is that Ayurveda doesn't talk about hormones, because the discovery of hormones is only like early 1900s, right? And these texts go back thousands of years. So the idea of hormones and how we understand them now, and sort of the lay person, I think a lot of women are getting a lot of information right now about hormones. And it's one of the things that you might go to a doctor, and they do a blood workup, and then they tell you things about, your hormones, and this is fairly new, historically speaking, for us to look at women's health in that way. So I got to give a big shout out to Dr. Claudia Welch, who I know you've had on the show more than once, right?
Yes.
Because it was really her book that came out, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life, where she really did a deep dive into, how we're talking about hormones, like what are they? And while I did draw as much as possible from the ancient texts to write this book, when it comes to how I'm thinking about and understanding and explaining hormones, a lot of that comes from Claudia, for sure. So she's also a Chinese medicine practitioner, so she had this kind of idea of yin and yang, which we also have in Ayurveda. Your listeners are probably used to hearing about it by now, but we have these sort of building qualities, things that are heavy and dense and slimy and slow. When we have things that are reducing or cleansing or lightening, and that's things that are hot, a little bit sharp, fast, So we see these qualities in our lifestyle, in our mind, in our foods, and then in the symptoms that manifest in our bodies. And so we have this sort of what I'm calling an essential balance that is at the heart of Ayurvedic health, which is that we have a balance of the heavy stuff, the cool stuff, the wet stuff, and the light, hot, and dry stuff. And so what's so fantastic about Claudia's work is that what she did that I find so helpful is she kind of took like all the hormones, because we've got the growth hormones, we've got the sleep hormones, right? We've got all these different kinds of hormones. I think with women's health, really simple how we can break it down with sex hormones, right? So the ones that are responsible for menstruation and ovulation. And so the two big ones there are estrogen and progesterone. And so these sex hormones, they are in our hormone balance, they are the heavy, dense, wet qualities, right? So those are the hormones that it's important for us to know that hormones they're like messengers. They're messengers that go around the body, like that send messages. So a hormone is something that tells the body to, say, produce more juice, right? Like we need more juice, or we need more digestive capacity, or we need more heat, more digestive juices versus more fertility juices. Those are very different things. And the body has like a set amount of resources. Right. It's like you're going to build, a house and you have your pile of wood. And it's like, well, some of this is going to go to the foundation. We need some pieces for the porch, right? Like, so the resources are being allocated around the body based on the messages that the hormones are sending, which is why sort of the master glands, the sort of that live at the center of the brain it's so important because that's where all these messages are coming from. If you look at our sex hormones as the sort of building, juicy part of the nature, right? That's what gives us like the moisture in the eyes and the skin, and the cervical fluid, the moisture in the vagina, which, if you don't know what I'm talking about, is because you're not old enough. Right? Because as women get older, they'll start to experience vaginal dryness. It's a really big symptom that a lot of women are dealing with right now. And so it's that moisture, right, that's in those generative tissues that's coming very much from estrogen. So like it's like our big kahuna building hormone, right? Mm-hmm. So between that and progesterone, they create a balance together. Progesterone balances estrogen so we don't get too much juice, which has its own, sort of grouping of symptoms and imbalances that it can cause. And I explain those sorts of things in the book. When we look to the other side of the spectrum for like, what is the light, sharp, dry, what's the real mobilizing hormones? Those are our stress hormones. Namely, we could say adrenaline and cortisol. And adrenaline is the one that comes like when you drink a bunch of coffee, it squirts out and makes you woo for a short period of time. I think it usually kind of wears off for people in say 5 or 6 hours. And then maybe we feel the crash as the body doesn't have that fake energy anymore. So the adrenaline, it can make you, how you get sweaty. I do anyway, when I drink coffee,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it definitely makes you hot.
Yes.
You can feel that. I think most people can attest to noticing how it dries the body as well when you take a lot of caffeinated stuff. And then cortisol is kind of the interesting one, and in Claudia's work, what I took away from that was that we're really pointing a big finger at cortisol right now and how it is at the heart of a lot of the end quote hormonal imbalances that we're seeing. Because cortisol is the one that the body pumps out for like long-term stressors. You know, like adrenaline comes when like you crash your car, you know, and you need like you need to do something immediately. But cortisol, I think of more like a cross plains migration, you know, or like a tribal winter season, you know, where it's like your body, yeah, or like an apocalypse, right? Where we're all like on the run from dinosaurs or something. And like it's like your body is like, okay, we need all hands on deck. The body is going to pump all the juice, all the resources into the arms and legs, away from the digestive organs and the sort of centralized energy that is essentially a state of balance, yeah, and of feeling good. So cortisol is kind of the opposite of that, with good reason, you know, if we need that. But what I think is happening for a lot of humans is that we are feeling stress and identifying with stress in such a way that we feel like we're on a cross plains migration all the time. Right. And the thing that's interesting about cortisol that's different from adrenaline is it takes days to get processed out of the bloodstream. So a lot of people are walking around with high cortisol levels, and that causes a lot of heat and dryness, and it really disturbs the body's natural allocation of resources. And so if you think about a body, you know, is it going to prioritize in a state of crisis or fear or stress? Is it going to prioritize survival or fertility?
Right. It's going to go for survival every time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that makes sense that our bodies will do that, but that's what bodies are doing. And so, you know, Claudia calls it the bucket syndrome, where it's like we have sort of the bucket of resources, and the stress situation is causing like a hole in the bucket. Right? So the stress process is stealing all the resources, right? So then the hormones are signaling like, okay, let's pump all the resources to the arms and legs, you know, and then our digestive juices and our generative organs, which are also in the center of the body, right, aren't getting as much prana, as much energy. And I think if we want to make this really simple, Colette, in a way that people can wrap their heads around, is like the stress hormones cause a hot and dry situation in the body. And the sex hormones are naturally cool and moist. And you can do all the cool and moistness that you want, you know, with substances, which I definitely talk about. There's recipes, right? Here's all the foods that are cool and moist and target the generative tissues. And we have to be working in tandem with managing this cortisol situation for sure, and making sure that over the course of time, we're thinking about that thread I mentioned earlier of how we do life.
Exactly. Yeah. The holistic picture of it all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. And you state in your book that stress also is the enemy of ojas, which when you mention, you know, cool and moist and sex hormones, of course, ojas is essential for this hormonal health. And I'd love for you to talk a little more about that, since we're on this discussion of stress, the impact of stress on our hormones, and particularly our very vital energy reserve of ojas.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so if you think about the qualities of survival versus the qualities of fertility, right? And I say fertility, but it doesn't have to mean like you want to have a baby. It's also like, it's like a reserve of creative, generative energy.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. That we could use to do anything we want. So instead of feeling like we're treading water throughout life, right, day by day, we're just trying to like breathe, you know, and keep the head above water. There's a feeling when you have that reserve that you speak of that we call ojas. There's a feeling that we have energy and attention, you know, and resources available for the joy and the passion and the creativity and all the things that I think a lot of women are really feeling a lack of right now, right?
Hugely, yeah.
Yeah. And ojas is also our physical, it's also the immunity of the body. And I picture that those moist and heavy and sort of slimy qualities threaded throughout the body, threaded around our organs, right? So imagine like pathogens moving through the bloodstream, right? And trying to get into an organ. And there's this film. I picture the ojas sort of like a film around it. And in anatomy, like a cadaver research, there is a sac, right? And it's fascial tissue. I just heard this great episode on Radio Lab about this. There was some scientists who were like, "Oh my gosh, we discovered this new thing, which is basically a fascial tissue that surrounds so many parts of the body that we didn't know it was there before, because cadavers are dead."
Right.
They've lost their own. They've lost their
Right.
owness, right?
Yeah.
So I forget what they did, but they had some sort of process they had to do in order to like view it and see it. I think it had to do with a particular imaging kind of a camera.
Wow, fascinating.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And it changed a little the way. I mean, I already had a hunch about ojas like that, that it was threaded throughout the body in a way.
Yeah. I hear it described sometimes in some excerpts I read that it's like a honeycomb around in the body, and then that the ojas is actually the honey, that's divine essence. But yeah, that's fascinating to hear it.
Yeah.
They could see that in the fascia.
Yes. Yeah. And it is honeycomb shaped, actually. Yeah. But the little passages in the honeycomb are the place where like pathogens can get through if there's no honey.
Right.
The honey is the protective mechanism or substance or juice in the body. And it helps us not get sick. It helps us not get cancer. It's like really important. And if we have an excess amount of hot and dry qualities burning in the body, and I just want to take a moment, Colette, and also mention the burn that I think a lot of people feel in their mind.
Oh, yeah.
Then, right, that's stress. It's a burning sensation in the mind that then spreads to the body, and we get sort of responses. And the way we would one of the ways we could describe that is through this cortisol imagery, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so, as you mentioned, the holistic approach, it really needs to be a systemic approach to our hormonal health, to enhancing our ojas. Everything is connected. Everything is woven together in the body and the mind. And so I'd love to talk now about that holistic systems approach to help balance our hormones and, and preserve and, enhance our ojas as well. And so you go through this and lots of detail in the book, but I'd love for you to pick out some that you'd like to highlight of how we can make sure that diet, lifestyle, self-care, and so on is included in this holistic approach.
Right. So what I settled on, Colette, for that question was digestion. Because if we look at ojas is described as the nutrient cream that results from our food that's been properly digested and assimilated into the body, and all the tissues have taken the elements that they need. Right. And so when we eat, and I describe this in detail in the book, but in short, when we eat food, right, it goes into the stomach, it gets churned, it goes into the small intestine. There's a further sort of chemical breakdown, right, absorption through the capillaries there, moving into the bloodstream, right? And then a picture like an irrigation, sort of washing through, that's nutrient fluid through the body. That's called rasa, which a lot of people have probably heard that word, Rasa is that nutrient fluid which is circulating through the body. And it holds the essence of the food that builds the tissues in the body, right? And in an ideal world, that rasa will have an essential balance of heating and cooling, right? And of juiciness and of sharpness, right? The sharp is going to help things penetrate into the tissue, right? It's like we need that essential balance in that nutritive factor moving in the bloodstream. And so rasa it's just digested food. That is what it is, right? It mixed with enzymes, a little bit, all the 5 elements are there. And when all the tissues have got what they need, then we get this super refined ojas, this creamy white milk-like substance that has been acted upon by the digestive fires throughout this process that over the course of a month, give or take, right? According to the classics, right? It takes about a month for the body to produce ojas. And so the place that I landed on as like the tool, for women to wrap their head around in how we get that reserve of energy, aside from what we've already talked about with stress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something that's always going on, right? There's demons. There's demons in our causal body that we were born with, that affect us.
Right.
There's trauma, there's the things that are happening in the daily life, and there's the overwhelm from the way that media is happening, and the availability of experience and information is now global. We're trying to digest the experience of humankind.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's never happened before.
Exactly.
In that way. Except in maybe like the Buddha, or Ramana Maharshi, like enlightened beings where it's their job to do that.
Yeah, but us as mere mortals handling all this incoming stressful information every day it's hard to process.
Right. So we have that, right? Let's just say, okay, that we're going to put that over in that bucket and come back to digestion, right? Because that is something that takes time. Right. And the skills that we develop to discipline the mind and to hold the heart, against all of this demons takes years. Right. Mm-hmm. So back down here on the ground, here we are needing to eat food several times a day. Right. Mm-hmm. And so these are all things that if anyone's studied Ayurveda before, we know about the sort of how we eat is so important, that we're sitting down when we eat, that we're not moving and eating at the same time, that we respect our food, that we perceive food as a healing medium on this, it's a sacred substance that this planet provides, for us to feed that well of creative and generative juice. And if we want to get the food to be transmuted into ojas, there's all these things that happen in between that have to do with digestion. And so in general, we have our recommendations around sort of one of the ones I think is big is not eating before the previous meal has been digested. I just see in practice, as you probably do as well, like how that really affects the digestive process when we put fresh food in on top of partially digested food.
Right.
Yeah. So we maybe have a problem that we're not eating meals, or we're not, we're eating too often, or we're eating at intervals that are too short. Right. So that's a practice that will also take time, but I think a great place to put some attention. Right. And then we have use of digestive spices, which is absolutely huge in Ayurveda. It's absolutely huge in how we transmute food properly from its raw forms into something the body can digest. That's what spices do. Right? It doesn't have to be like Indian flavors. It can also be things, thyme, oregano, basil, all the things. There's rosemary, right? I could go all day, but all of the herbs and spices that are available when we work with those in the food. And I go in depth in the book, in all my books, about the qualities of different spices, and how we use some to promote the building juicy stuff, how we might use others to promote lightening up when things are too sticky and heavy, right? Like a situation like PCOS usually falls into sort of a sticky, heavy situation. So we create that essential balance in the digestive juice with not only sort of the timing of our meals, let's say, and obviously our choices of what we eat, but I think that can be less important actually then the use of digestive spices in all the different ways that I teach in the book that we can use them, right? Like in waters, in foods, in, in all the different ways that spices can be incorporated. So that's just such a fantastic tool because when we do something like, let's use an example of an herbal water, the panacea is the cumin, coriander, and fennel. We call that the CCFT, right? And so among those spices, there's qualities that balance all of the different elements in the body and provide the digestive capacities that are needed by all the different aspects, right, of the body. So we sip that, right, and it's in a liquid medium, and that rasa that circulates, right, via the blood through all of the tissues is also a liquid. So I really like the idea of medicinal liquids, like herbal waters, spiced waters, and tonics, like milk and ashwagandha or shatavari, for example. So there's a lot of that kind of business in the book, a lot of sort of liquid mediums, because I think they're going to digest well for people. So if we want to kind of get medicinal in the kitchen, there's a lot of that kind of information. And I'm so jazzed right now, Colette, to have this experience, like to explain this to people, because I really think that if it makes sense, we're going to be so motivated to do it.
Exactly.
We're going to be so motivated because it's like, the food that I'm eating has to go through this transmutation process and turn into this liquid, this, glorious nutritive factor that moves through the body and ultimately ends up creating like honey in the comb that protects my organs from cancer and etc. Like this is big stuff, right? Like it works.
Right. For our longevity, our physical, mental health, it's our vital immunity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. And it's, as you say, holistic, right? So when we go at it with this understanding of like food is point A, and feeling amazing is letter Z, right? Like there's all these points in between that I think when we understand what I like to call it the story of digestion and nutrition, how that happens. I think when we understand how it happens, we visualize that, we hold that as like one of the beautiful processes that the body is doing for us, without us even having to think about it. And it's what provides well-digested food is ultimately what provides not only our longevity and health, but also that reserve or that well of generative energy and joy, and also the ability to connect with our meaning in being here. I think a lot of humans are also struggling with that, because if the body is off kilter, it can be more difficult, to connect with that state of dharma.
100%. Yeah. The ojas brings mental clarity with it and an awareness of the bigger picture of life, right? As well. We have it, and it's a connection to our consciousness as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So important. And I'd love for you to touch on if there's a particular spice or dish that you have in there that you love for enhancing ojas. Is there something in particular that comes to mind?
Oh, there's so many dishes. I really like I like a milk-based, again, we'll stay with the liquid vibe, right? Because we've already talked about how that works. I really like a milk-based tonic for ojas, because ojas is milk-like. Right, its description is that it looks like milk, in the body, and it doesn't have to be cow milk. It could be a milk made from a plant like almonds or hemp seeds. It could be goat milk, right? A milk-like thing, right, as the base, and then we add dry ginger to that, and potentially some dates. Right. So if we use something like dates, almonds, a milk-like substance, and the dry ginger, because the dry ginger brings the sharpness, which is really important because those are all heavy and moist foods.
Right.
Right. So that's really important. And it's something that we have to take warm, so like milk, almonds, dates, spices. So ginger's my favorite, but I'll always go with the mix. I have the sweet spice mix, which is always a combination of cardamom, cinnamon, and dry ginger. And I put those three together, and they're just like in a jar. In this book, there's actually a sweet rose masala recipe, which has dried rose petals in it. And what I love about that is, where I live, we have the beach rose. Like I have access to dried rose petals.
Oh, nice.
Like I can go out and harvest the petals by the beach, dry them, and then crush them and mix them in with these sweet spices. So rose is something that really has an affinity for the female generative system. And it has a subtle essence of sort of beauty, we could say. Like there's like a calm to it. It's cool in its nature. And there's something about that floral taste and aroma, I think, right? That really affects the mind in a way. So I like mixing that in. So this sort of like milky, but a little bit sweet, like rose, gingery, warm.
Great.
Like so those lines.
Yeah. So we see that has that unctuous quality, that has the grounding, the heavy quality, like kapha increasing foods, as it were. And they're very sattvic as well. The dates in particular. So great. Thank you for that. And I'd love to touch on here as we can finish up here in soon is you mentioned the importance of how we live our lives as well. And, a lot of times I think we can get really myopic about, the food and so on and going towards different herbs. But we need to look at that overall picture of our lives. And I'd love to touch on that. And you do talk about that in the book as well. And in particular, how we're living our lifestyle, like the meaning of our lives, like you just talked about. And that really is, right, the journey of Ayurveda. The overarching theme is this journey of self-discovery and this, self-realization and bringing your true nature into the world. But I'd love to talk about how we should think of these different aspects around us. Now, could be a whole podcast episode on its own. So picking on a couple of things that you'd like to talk about today, be it lifestyle or meaning or relationships. I just did a podcast episode on, guidelines for managing sexual energy and so on. So it's like, it's thinking about all these different aspects of your life and how, they affect your ojas, and particularly with relationships and, as well. And sexual energy, because the depletion of that means depletion of ojas too. But if you would like to choose a particular area here that you would like to discuss that from your book.
Yeah. While there are so many practical, there's a whole section of the book about just, daily rhythms and self-care. I would love to just wax philosophical on this question, because if we go back, I have this phrase I keep coming back to, which is navigating principles. And I feel like this is really important in the story of how we live our lives, is what's driving us. I think that having an understanding of what is our navigating principle, so you take your Google map, you're in the car and you punch in where you're going. And then everything between now and you getting there, right, it may be a zigzag, there may be some like stops along the way and things that happen, but it's that navigating principle of where you intend to go. It's dry, it's pulled that like that map, you're following that thing, right, in moving in this direction. And that's what draws us into balanced daily life, like a balanced daily life, right? Is like, what is it that I am moving towards? And that way, everything that happens, the big stuff, the little stuff, the busy times, the crazy times, the grief, all the things that are transpiring in our day-to-day life. There's a lot going on, but that a central aspect of the mind is remaining fixed on the goal, the navigating principle. And what I want to be clear about is that can change, and that does absolutely change as we move through the span of our life. Right. So it's like our values might shift. It might shift from like being passionate about, career to being passionate about self-evolution, right? That would be a fantastic one, right? Or it moves from like really kind of like buckling down during those years where, you're supporting a family and making babies and all these things, to moving into a more expansive time, right? Where the navigating principle isn't like sort of survival and optimizing the life of the children, and of the family and the community, but actually moves back towards like, well, okay, now what do I want? What do I need in order to manifest in the best way possible and have the best effect on the planet during my lifetime? I think those are the kinds of questions, if we kind of keep coming back to, it puts you in a place where you're like, okay, like I'm at a time and I describe in the book sort of the different stages of life and the different aims of life that are described in Vedic philosophy. And so we might be moving towards physical wealth, artha, wealth, but it doesn't have to be stuff, it's also a feeling of security. I work with, as you probably do, I've worked with so many young women who have irregularities in the menstrual cycle, and it keeps coming back to the fact that they're very unstable.
Yeah.
And of course we are. In my 20s, I was super unstable. It was really fun, right? But then at a point, imbalances were happening, and I was like, I got to get a house or something, I got to like ground it down, so I think that looking at our lifespan, where am I? Am I in the child bearing or the child rearing or the careering? What stage am I in? Am I moving into spiritual evolution? Am I contemplating aging and death? I think that is a spiritual practice unto itself. And over the course of a life, we're moving through these different values and different aims. And I think if we know sort of so let's say, okay, I'm in I'm in the raising a family time of life. And so I know that my MO is, to make sure that like everybody in the family is having all the ojas, right? That everybody is feeling safe and stable and has like as many of the resources as we can provide for them, whether they're emotional or physical or mental. And so one's daily life is going to take on a very different schedule, a different flavor, right? And a different focus for that person or that time of life than someone who's like, actually, in this time of life, it's really about me manifesting as me, not as the family unit, but as just this self, this one particular container on this planet. And your daily life then takes on a different shape. Maybe you're like, well, now I'm definitely putting aside like 30 minutes every morning for meditation or whatever it is, some sort of internalizing practice. So I think our dinacharya, our daily flow that provides our self-care, the moments of self-care are woven into that daily rhythm. That rhythm that's the fabric of our life. And that's woven together by the weaver, who is the one who is typing in the destination in Google Maps.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that thought of having a navigating principle and allowing flexibility for change, but you have your principles or your values, and then all your decisions get filtered through that,
Exactly.
Be it job, relationship, career choices, whatever it is, where to live, that it all gets filtered through this navigating principle. And I think that can be so helpful, especially in a world where we often experience decision fatigue or decision paralysis because there's so much choice. And so much coming at us all the time. And I think that's where the overwhelm comes. And it can almost bring us to a standstill sometimes in regards, where do I turn? And even just all the information, as you said, the start of the podcast here is about, this hormonal balance that we're supposedly striving for. But we know that in Ayurveda, everything's always in flux, given time of day, season, age, many, many reasons in our menstrual cycle and so on. So everything's always in flux. But, just having some navigating principle that you can have as your cornerstone and always go back to and make decisions and filter them through that, I think that can be really helpful. I mean, so many people who are experiencing this decision fatigue and decision paralysis nowadays. And yeah, it can be challenging for people.
Right. And I feel that decision fatigue is a symptom of our coming away from whatever our navigating principle is right now, or maybe you're in a transition period where that thing is shifting. And that's a hard thing, where you're like, whoa, tectonic, like empty nesting, for example.
Yes.
And it's like, well, what's life about? And that might take a little time, and be rocky. But again, like creating, I think space is the key, creating space, in the consciousness for these truths to drop in.
100%. Yeah. And unless, we create space, we're never going to have those creative thoughts. Like you talk about that creativity, that intuition coming in. And that's particularly important today because we're so on all the time. We're so entertained all the time that it can be challenging to find space, and we have to make time for that.
Yes. Yes. And I think we live in a cultural climate where it's always about doing more.
Yeah.
Like so many of the podcasts and things I listen to are offering like, take this substance, take this powder or this pill, or do this thing, do this practice, or do this kind of exercise, or whatever it is. And it's like the countercultural, most courageous thing that I suggest for us to do at this time is to do less.
Yeah.
To not do all those things. Mm-hmm. To not do all those things and just see what arises.
Right.
It's like, well, maybe I'm going to take a walk without listening to a podcast, without looking at a phone. Like I'm just going to go out in nature and just wander around,
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important to have that quiet time, and to also learn to trust your own navigation as well. We can get information and soak up all this wonderful information out there, but also coming back to yourself and your navigating principles. Like, how does this read for me? And, does this, if I filter it through my navigating principles, how does that sit for me? So I think that's always important, to come back to yourself and, know that you have a unique way of living in the world. You are unique. And so you need to see how all this information coming in fits with you, and, trust yourself. And that's what I love about Ayurveda. It empowers people to make their own decisions, and really is empowering. You're not relying on any one thing. You're learning how to take care of yourself and navigate life for your unique constitution.
Right. Which, if I can speak to those who are overwhelmed, right, where a vision of doing life like how you just described is also overwhelming, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's so far from how we feel now, right? So in those situations, what I find myself recommending often is to actually then go into part 2, go into the Dinacharya part of the book, go into the daily rhythms part, where we talk about all the things, that we do in Ayurveda to cultivate that ojas, and to keep the body clean and healthy and optimize the digestion. Go in there, look at the routines, pick one, right? This is when we're overwhelmed, you pick one thing and you're like, I'm going to do that thing. And I make a recommendation in the book to these people. I'm like, this is the one, right? The one is scrape the tongue and drink hot water, right? And if your house is mayhem, I have had good luck with suggesting having a small electric kettle, like upstairs, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, right? Like upstairs or whatever, in the parent zone, right?
Yes, yes.
There's a kettle so that, you can scrape your tongue. That does require a sink with no one else around, but you scrape your tongue and then you sip the hot water, right? And then it's like, talk about navigating principles, right? So you've just typed into your Google map what's most important to you in beginning this day. And it's that your intention is to show up for being you, the best that you are today.
Great. I love that. And that one thing is going to empower you. And it's like, okay, I've done that. I feel accomplished. Great. Now I can go take care of the chaos outside my door.
Exactly.
But it's like when things get chaotic, it's just focusing on one little thing at a time. And I love that you brought that up. Kate, thank you so much. So much great information. I'd love for you to tell people where they can find your new book, Everyday Ayurveda for Women's Health, and more about you and your services, please.
Yeah, thank you. So the book you can find anywhere you buy books, right? So like your country's version of Amazon, your local bookstore is a great way to do it. But the distribution is great all over the world. And we're going to put in the show notes, the audio tracks. Definitely stay tuned to that. And over the course of the next 6 months, I'm going to be dropping a lot of supportive courses and content. So definitely getting on my newsletter is a great start. People can do that by DMing me on Instagram at kateodonnell.ayurveda. And I'll be sharing content that got cut from the book because the book came out too long. So there's more about herbs. There's more about stress reduction. So those courses are going to be dropping. I'm starting a podcast.
Ooh,
this
congratulations.
Wow. Yep. So that will be available. And there's a lot going on the Ayurvedic Living Institute. That's my site. There's a lot going on there. And if there's, I will definitely be launching courses related to women's health and related to working with what I talk about in this book. And so I would just say, stay tuned over the next 6 months, but don't miss the audio tracks because those are free. Yeah.
Lovely. I think that's a great idea. You get all that foundational information. So I'll put all those links in the show notes. And Kate, thank you so much. Congratulations again on the book. And I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Yeah, it was lovely to connect. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kate, and please check out all the links in the show notes. And if you think that this episode will be helpful to family or friends, I would really appreciate it if you could share it so we can spread this wisdom of Ayurveda. And if you want support on your Ayurvedic journey, check out my online services where I offer online consultations, online cleanses, and educational program. If you haven't already subscribed or followed the podcast, please do so, and the new episodes will automatically download for you every week. And if you feel like you're getting benefit from this podcast, I would really appreciate a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcast. And this will help others to find the show, and we can spread this wisdom of Ayurveda. You can find me on social media, on Facebook under Elements, Healing and Wellbeing, and on Instagram, my new page is Elements of Ayurveda Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.